So, when I was about 17, my family had just moved back to Canada from living in the USA. It was a bit sudden, and being a family of 6, it was a little bit of scramble to find a place to house all of us before the snow hit. So my mom and dad decided to live in an old house that my grandpa had on his property, just for the duration on the approaching winter ahead. The house was my great-uncle's and my grandpa skidded from his brother's property to his place. Now my grandpa has 2 quarter sections, and this house is tucked away, back away from the main house. So the power is ran from the main house, and with it being so far away, there is no running water. This house is old, so to add to the no running water, there also isn't heat or a wood stove. Just to give you an idea of what we were living in. Me being a 17-year-old, I often stayed in town and didn't stay there very often. Not just because it was a pain and the no water and heat, because it was just creepy. I specifically remember the first time it happened. I was in my bed. I was the only one who would stay downstairs. With the wood stove, everyone wanted to sleep upstairs since it was warmer. So I was just starting to fall asleep and I started to feel the room get really heavy. I remember the feeling of not being alone. The doorway didn't have a door on it. It only had a beaded curtain, and I could feel it standing there. I then remember having the feeling of total fear rush over me and frozen to my core with it. Then it moved closer, and I felt the bed move and someone crawl right up beside me. Not in a way that was super noticeable, but in a sneaky, slow sloth moving type of way. I specifically remember wanting to vomit with fear. Then I felt it. The feeling of an unshaven face rub against mine. I lost my damn mind. I scrambled out of bed holding my blanket and ran up the stairs to my parents' room. I was so out of my mind with fear I couldn't scream. I slept on the floor on my dad's side of the bed. The next morning, my mom was wondering why her 17-year-old daughter was curled up at the foot of their bed, and I told her what happened. Later that morning, we walked over to my grandpa's house to have breakfast and go chat. My mom brought up my wild story. My grandpa and grandma silently listened, and as my mom was laughing at the last bit of the story, my grandparents got really serious and turned to each other. Apparently this has been an issue in the old house, and they didn't want to tell us, hoping we didn't acknowledge it, then it wouldn't bother us. I can honestly say I didn't feel angry or upset. I just wanted to cuddle. I didn't stay there much after that. I moved in with a cousin in town.
I've had a couple of different experiences with things that I don't think were of this world. One of them, though, felt more like staring into the eyes of an angry god. I might post it here if anyone's interested, or if it would fit. So I think this one fits better. Back a couple of years ago, I got into a pretty bad argument with a friend. In short, I had been keeping a secret and had come clean about it. She was really mad, and I went to bed feeling like shit. Of course, I'll admit, I've had some issues with mental health, like depression, and my family doesn't have a good track record with mental health either. But I'd never experienced anything like this before. About halfway through the night, I woke up. I think it was a dream. Again, I think. I was sitting upright in my bed, holding a specific knife that I actually owned in my hand. I looked around my room, and it was illuminated by particularly bright moonlight. This was odd since my curtains were closed, but it didn't feel off. I looked at a part of my wall that the light was illuminating quite brightly, and saw words written in some kind of paint. I don't want to say blood, because that sounds cheesy, but that's honestly what it looked like. The words were "kill yourself," written in what looked like blood. It sounds stupid, but that's what it looked like. As dumb as it sounds, I feel like those are common demonic tropes for a reason. The trope had to start somewhere, right? I should add, I have never once self-harmed or even really considered suicide at that point, despite my depression. Anyway, When I read those words, it all felt like it clicked. I held the knife up to my wrists and was about to start cutting when something caught my eye in the dark corner of my room. I squinted to get a better look and realized it was somewhat humanoid. It looked absolutely terrifying and had these eyes and teeth that looked like those of a deep-sea fish. Think Gollum mixed with a human with an anglerfish mouth. Not pleasant. When I saw it, the light in the room suddenly went from moonlight to flickering orange, as if there was a fire behind me illuminating my room. I ended up bolting upright a few minutes before my alarm in a cold sweat. I figured it was just a creepy nightmare, so I got up and went to school. My skin was crawling the whole drive there. I get out of my first class and I start getting anxious, so I reach up to touch my cross necklace. As I do, a voice that isn't mine speaks in my head and says, "God won't save you." For the next few months, I had these incidents, where basically it would feel like some outside force would jump on me and want me to kill myself at the slightest negative happening. I tried to face this feeling by picking up the knife to prove that I could resist, but the instant I picked up the knife, it felt like I could not put it down. Eventually, I managed to put it back in my drawer, and I didn't touch it until I hadn't had an incident in a while. The incidents stopped after I went outside during one. My family was in the house, and I firmly told the demon that it would leave. By the power of Jesus, it would leave. I honestly feel like I'm lucky that I remembered that part of the Bible, because I think it worked. That was my last incident, and it sort of ended after I told the demon to screw off. I don't know if that's what made it go away, or if it just lost interest after I wouldn't kill myself. So yeah, that's my demon story. I actually went looking online a while back to see what I was dealing with, and I found an East Asian demon that seemed like it fit the description. A human goblin thing with sharp teeth that finds people at low points and tries to convince them to kill themselves. Honestly, if it weren't for the fact that I saw this thing illuminated in what looked like hellfire, I would just assume it was depression. But whatever it is, it's gone now, and I haven't had a single incident in it's got to be over 3 years at this point. I was 17, and I'm 20 now.
This occurred when I was around 10 years old. I grew up in a small town and lived in a 3-bedroom, 1,500 square foot house with 6 people. This meant my sisters and I share a small room. My grandma decided she was tired of having no space in our room with the 3 single beds, and it was time to get a bunk bed. In this small town, I remember shopping for this bunk bed in this rundown store. It wasn't the typical furniture store. I almost believe it was a secondhand shop or some type of discount store. By the time I was in my teens, this building was turned into a billiard and game room. This place wasn't there long. The exciting day arrived. We put the bunk bed in the room, moved in a dresser with a small black and white old TV and Atari. These were not new, but moved from another location in the house. This was the late 80s. Yes, we had an Atari when everyone else had a Nintendo or a SNES. The Atari and TV were placed so that I could sit on the end of the single bed and use it as a chair while we played the Atari. The space between the single bed and bunk bed was approximately 2 to 3 feet. This was when the paranormal activity in our room started to become frequent. I had opted to take the single bed since my sisters really wanted to sleep in the cool bunk bed. They have more stories than myself. Anyway, one night I remember being in the room alone playing on the Atari. My grandma and mom were talking to some family members that had stopped by, and my sisters were watching TV in the family room. Again, a small house, small room. I know I was alone in the room. Being alone and being alone with the Atari was something that didn't happen often. I was focused on my game, when to my right I could hear the bunk bed shake a little, like someone just grabbed it and shook it for a second. That had to be in my imagination, right? A few seconds more go by, and the thing shakes again, this time for a few seconds. I remember distinctively telling myself, don't be afraid, don't look, don't be afraid, it's nothing. Almost to a new high score. And if I die, I don't have to give anyone else a turn. Motivation to stay. A few more seconds go by as I kept playing the game. It shakes a third time, for what I remember being the same interval as the last. Again, I tell myself to be strong, don't be afraid, it's just your imagination, don't even look. Well, with whatever was happening, I must have pissed it off. With my lack of response or acknowledgement, the bunk bed began to violently shake without stopping. I just stood up and ran, dropping the Atari paddle and hearing it swing into the dresser. I didn't get to beat my high score. My grandma and my mom didn't believe me. I was laughed at by the visiting family members. At least I didn't have to sleep in that bunk bed or go back into that room by myself. My sisters have some other crazy stories, like an old man ghost standing on the end of the bed climbing the ladder with glowing white hair. One was hearing glass shatter in the room and not being able to find the source. But that was my personal scary story with it. We ended up having a house fire due to a malfunctioning AC unit 4 years later, and it destroyed that bed. After restoring the house and damages, my twin and I ended up moving back into that room with 2 single beds. The air in that room felt lighter and more free. Never had I had a paranormal experience in that room after that. Hence, we dubbed it the Haunted Bunk Bed.
Thank you to everyone who enjoyed my previous Reddit post about my experience living with a demon/poltergeist. A few people in the comments were asking if I've had other paranormal experiences, and I sure do. However, I need to add a trigger warning to this post. I will mention suicide, so if that's something that's triggering or makes you uncomfortable, I don't recommend reading this story. But without further ado, here's the time I saw a full-body apparition of my high school teacher. For a bit of backstory, me and my dad's side of the family have always been attuned with spirits and the paranormal, and it's affected my grandmother, aunts, uncle, most of my cousins, and of course, my dad and I. Spirits are drawn toward us because it's easier for us to see them and be positively or negatively affected by their presence. My earliest spiritual memory is when I was a kid seeing and speaking to spirits. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that I've seen many full-body apparitions in my life, but this experience was by far the most surreal. I was a freshman in high school when this encounter took place. On this day, I got to school much earlier than usual. I got there about 30 minutes before classes started, so I hung out by my locker for a bit. The student population was fairly small, so the entrance to our school was a narrow double-door entryway. During the start of the school day, students and faculty were usually squished together like a can of sardines while trying to enter the building. Anyways, my first class was near the front entrance, and my locker was on the opposite end of the school. While walking to class, I had to push against the flow of people entering the building, all while getting slammed with backpacks and glared at by annoyed upperclassmen, but suddenly, I got a very uneasy feeling. Walking with the crowd of incoming students was my school's art teacher. He was fairly popular with his pupils. He had recently graduated from college, so it was easy to relate to him. Typically, people would chat with him wherever he went, but today, no one was acknowledging him. It was at that moment that we locked eyes. He looked startled when I saw him, and his reaction totally caught me off guard. Visually, he looked normal, but in my mind, I saw a dark aura hovering over his head. A sharp chill rushed down my spine that was so intense it was practically painful. I felt weirdly drawn to his energy, and it scared me. Like, a lot. I physically had to struggle to break our gaze, and when I did, I practically ran to my classroom. After our first period, it wasn't long before the entire school had erupted into chaos. Our art teacher, the one that I had seen earlier in the hallway, had never showed up to class. This sparked out-of-control rumors, and some of his dedicated pupils were starting to panic and cry. A couple of girls were crying in my second period, so I avidly assured them that I had seen him this morning. It made them calm down and feel a bit better, so I promised all my friends and classmates that I had seen him just a little while earlier. But at lunchtime, the news finally broke. The night before, our teacher had committed suicide. Students were crying and the school fell silent, but I had seen him. I was confused and frustrated, so I was begging my friends, teachers, and even strangers to listen to me when I said he was okay. People became furious with me. I was accused of making up lies for attention and was shunned by a lot of my close friends. I was an insecure 14-year-old, so getting attention was the last thing I wanted. I had no reason to lie. However, I would soon find out that I wasn't the only one who had seen him. During lunch, as I was rambling on and on about seeing him, 3 upperclassmen approached me, and they all began to corroborate my story. Yeah, I saw him by the school entryway. So did I. Me too. Something was off, but it was certainly him. Did no one else see him? And so on. Not only had we all seen him, it was at the exact same time, in the same location, and we all had the same reaction to his presence.